What's going on, Muscle Monsters? Alain Gonzalez here, and welcome to Nutrition Masterclass number 2. Alright, in this video we are going to answer the big nutrition questions. Alright, so how many meals per day for optimal muscle gains? When and what should you consume pre-workout? When and what should you consume post-workout? The best times to consume carbs if you want to avoid fat storage and build muscle, and how to know if you're eating enough to build muscle in general. Alright, so today's episode we are talking about the biggest muscle building nutrition myths revealed and the truth about eating to grow. And you're finally going to have the answers to all of your biggest nutrition questions. And I think they're going to shock you simply because they go against a lot of what most people have taught in the past, including myself. Alright, so let's jump right in to topic number 1, which is meal frequency. How many meals per day should you consume to build muscle? Is it 1 meal, 3 meals, or 6 meals? And in the past, we've talked about constantly feeding the body, right? Constantly throwing that wood into the fire to keep that to keep it burning, right? So this comes from the idea of the thermic effect of food, right? So every time we consume foods, we burn calories to digest it, okay? And what we believe is that the amount of time, say for example we're eating 6 meals a day, then since we are burning or going through that thermic effect of food 6 times a day, that our metabolism is actually raised. Alright, but the fact is that on average the thermic effect of food constitutes for only about 10% of calories consumed. Alright, so what this means is, and I'll give you an example, trainee number 1 who consumes 6 meals per day, and he's eating 3,000 total calories, so he's eating about 500 calories per meal. The thermic effect of food for each meal is about 50 calories. Alright, so take that 50, multiply it by his 6 meals, and at the end of the day, the thermic effect of food constitutes for about 300 total calories. But if we look at trainee number 2, he's only consuming 4 meals per day, but he's eating the same amount, right? 3,000 total calories. In this event, he has to eat 750 calories per meal, and the thermic effect of food per meal is about 75 calories. All right, so if you take that 75 multiply it by 4, his 4 meals a day, then again, the thermic effect of food constitutes for about 300 calories. Okay. Now you probably heard in the past about drip feeding the muscle. You know, what about frequent meals for feeding the muscle? Well, we have to understand digestion and absorption, right? Absorbing and digesting nutrients is a very slow process. It's not like we eat a meal and we automatically digest it and we're depleted again, all right? So if you haven't eaten in 6 hours, this does not mean that you're depleted of nutrients. Remember, absorbing it, digesting it is a slow process, and we also store these nutrients. Alright, you also have to understand that muscle loss or muscle gain is not going to be determined by how many meals you eat on a daily basis, but rather how many calories you're consuming, the macronutrient distribution, and more importantly, your training program. Alright, so I'll give you an example in terms of carbs, right? So let's say trainee number 1 consumes 6 meals per day, and it's 400 total carbs for the day. So roughly about 66 or 67 carbs per meal. The thermic effect of food, since he's still eating that 3,000 calories for the day, is still 300. Alright, so if you take the amount of carbs he's consuming per meal, multiply it by the amount of meals he's consuming, at the end of the day he's still eating 400 carbs. And trainee number 2 who consumes the 4 meals per day, same calories, so he's consuming 400 total carbs, 100 carbs per meal. The thermic effect of food for the day is still 300. Well, if you look at his carb intake is 100 per meal times 4 meals a day, it's still 400 carbs, and that's what our body understands. All right, so let's jump into pre-workout nutrition. When and what to eat pre-workout. So when? 1 to 2 hours before a training bout is preferable, right? What should you be consuming? Just carbs and proteins. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to avoid fats. This simply means that we want carbs and proteins in the meal. So how much protein? Typically about 1/4 gram per pound of body weight is more than enough. And then how many carbs? 30 to 60 grams of carbs should suffice for most people. All right, and why? Pretty simply to ensure the increases in protein synthesis and to drive that performance. If you're anything like me, you probably train fasted every once in a while, and it's okay, but only under specific circumstances. So if you're eating in a caloric surplus regularly, if you feel primed and energetic in the gym, and if you're consuming the appropriate post-workout nutrition, in this case, training fasted is not going to hurt you. All right, so speaking of post-workout, let's talk about what this should consist of. So when and what to eat post-workout. All right, when? 1 to 2 hours after a training bout, preferably. Now again, if you're training in a fasted state, consume your post-workout immediately, right? But if you're having your pre-workout meal, then you should be good for a good 1 to 2 hours after your training bout. So what should you be consuming? You should at least be consuming enough protein after your workout. All right, so how much protein? Again, about 1/4 gram per pound of body weight will suffice. And why? To ensure the increases in protein synthesis. All right, so what about post-workout carbs? What about the insulin spike or glycogen restoration that we've all heard and talked about in the past? All right, the idea of spiking your insulin following an intense training bout comes from the idea that we are depleted of glycogen and thus causing our bodies to feed from our muscle tissue. Fortunately for us, even the most intense weight training routines do very little toward depleting glycogen, especially when you're consistently eating in a caloric surplus and consuming the appropriate macronutrient ratio. All right, now let's talk about carbohydrate timing. When should you consume your carbs? All right, here's a few things that you need to understand. Energy in versus energy out, right? Again, similar to the example I gave you before, it doesn't matter if you're eating 400 grams of carbs around your workout or if you're eating them consistently throughout the day. All your body knows is that it's getting 400 grams of carbs for the day. All right? Now, if your macronutrient distribution is correct, then you'll never be depleted of glycogen. All right? And also, if you take two identical individuals under the same circumstances and one consumes carbs at a specific time of the day and the other consumes them, kind of whenever he wants, there's going to be absolutely no difference in body composition. All right, and going back to the point that that you'll never be depleted of carbs or glycogen rather, if there was times in the day where we would benefit from carb intake, it would always be readily available, assuming that your macronutrient distribution is correct. All right. Now we're going to talk about eating enough to build muscle, how to ensure that you're eating enough to grow. All right. First, we all know that you must be in a positive net energy balance, right? In a caloric surplus. So you're eating more calories than you're burning. But you also have to understand that that surplus should come from the right macronutrient distribution. All right, so if you're eating enough to gain weight, but the macronutrient ratio is off, then you could just be hurting your performance and gaining fat and not muscle, and vice versa. Alright, so what I want to do really quickly is give you a very basic strategy for ensuring that you are in a caloric surplus and you are eating enough to grow. Also, as far as the macronutrient ratio, we talked about that in the previous nutrition masterclass video. So you probably already have that in order, and if you don't, then just go back to that video, download the calculator, and that'll give you your macronutrient ratio. Alright, so check it out. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to weigh yourself every single morning under the same circumstances. Okay, so if you look at the chart below, you're going to notice that this person is weighing themselves, Sunday through Saturday, and then they take an average of their weigh-ins for the week. So that first average was 145. Okay, and then they do it again for the next week and they get an average. So again, this average is 145.8. So this means that this person is in fact in a caloric surplus. They are gaining weight, and if their macronutrient ratio is in the right numbers, if they're doing the right numbers in terms of their macronutrient distribution, then they are more than likely gaining muscle mass. All right, and the reason that you don't want to, for example, track your weight, for example, on a Monday and then next Monday is because, as you can see here, this person was heavier the previous Monday and lighter the next Monday. So if you do that, you might just assume that you're in a deficit or that you're losing weight or whatever the case may be, when in fact this is not true. Right? As you can see, this person is actually in a surplus. Had they only weighed themselves on Monday, then they wouldn't be able to tell. So it's critical that you're weighing yourself every day and getting an average of your weight, as opposed to picking one day out of the week to weigh yourself. Alright, so let's do a big nutrition questions recap. Meal frequency. It does not matter for overall body composition. Pre-workout meal, preferably consumed 1 to 2 hours pre-workout. Post-workout meal, preferably consumed 1 to 2 hours post-workout. Carbohydrate timing, it does not matter for overall body composition. And eating enough, if you're not gaining weight, you're not eating enough, period. It's really that simple. Alright, so let's talk about what's next in the Nutrition Masterclass. We are going to go over a very simple step-by-step instructional video to creating your own muscle building meal plan. So if you don't want to calculate calories every single day, if you want to eliminate the guesswork so you don't have to think about, oh, what should I eat next? And if you prefer being on a set schedule and don't have the time to calculate every single meal, then this video is for you. So if that sounds like it's for you, then stay tuned for my next Nutrition Masterclass video, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Peace.